Hello and welcome to the ADHD Skills Lab. This is our research recap episode with the wonderful Will Kerb from Hacking Your ADHD. In each one of these episodes, we will go through a paper, we'll look at some of the practical takeaways, how it's going to affect you with your ADHD, as well as what we liked and what we didn't like about it. So if you've always wondered where some of this research that helps make some of the decisions about your life is coming from, this is what we unpack. This is what we demystify. So come along for the ride. Well, I think we should start by just telling everyone this is going to be good. We're going to explain it. Don't worry. And let's start with what is hot and cold executive functioning, because that's kind of the basis of this. And for a lot of people, that might be a totally new concept, but it's incredibly important for your everyday life with ADHD.
Yeah. And also, executive functions are one of those things that we have to grasp on. They're these higher order processes in our brain with working memory, or inhibition, be it emotional or getting things started, and then also our cognitive flexibility.
Yeah.
But then if we go into what the hot and cold side of this is, we have the hot ones being this emotionally charged side of things, are reward processing, risk taking.
Yep.
Delaying gratification, and a lot of our emotional regulation. Makes sense.
Yeah.
If you just from the outside, if I say someone is in a hot state emotionally, I'm like, oh, they're feeling a lot of emotions.
The steam is rising from their head, if they're an emoji.
Or even if they're really sad or something, that's still a hot state, even though it's the cold emotion.
Yep.
But so then we'll go to the cold executive functions that are logical, unemotional, problem solving side of things. And that's, I always get a little bit uneasy when I say something's logical and unemotional.
I'm just trying to imagine a moment that I've been detached from my emotions, just logically working through something. I have a hard time imagining it, but I think I must have done it once or twice.
Yeah. So the thing that I initially came up with was doing just a math problem. If you had to I have on my sticky note here that says 4 plus 4. I'm like, that's 8. There's no, that's pure logic. And there was no emotion involved there because it's not hard for me.
Yep.
But if I put that into a math test, I might be like, oh, are they trying to trick me? Is there something else going on here?
What does it actually
I'm
mean?
Overthinking things now.
Exactly. And it is, and I think you have a good example here, because we were going through our notes on this, where, it's this idea of if you're just vacuuming, right? That's another example. I have a floor, this is the floor I vacuum, I go here, and then I go here, and then I add this, and then I remember, oh, I got to go back around and do this piece as well. You're just working through the systems. You're using your working memory, you're using your time awareness, etc., just kind of in a logical way, versus when something's happening, the kids are yelling at you, or you have to, somebody is saying, hey, something's on fire, we've got to do this thing. And then you're doing it under a stressful scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes it much harder for us to stay on task. Although I want to emphasize that with ADHD, we have impairments in both the hot side and the cold side.
Yeah.
Just planning, thinking through our day can have a lot of problems. And then adding the hot side I find tends to make it worse, at least on my side.
And the research will back you up on that. If you think it's hard to remember where your keys are, in general, that's true. But if you think it's hard to remember where your keys are when you're late for something and somebody's saying, we've got to go, come on, then it's almost impossible. So yeah, we are learning, and one of the things they're researching now is this idea that in different emotional states, it is more difficult to do things. They've just given it a really specific name and specific set of structures for what is probably a very common experience in everyone's lives.
Yeah, and one thing that wasn't covered strictly in this paper, because it goes a little bit beyond that, but I think is quite relevant, is so we're specifically talking about hot, cold executive functions, but this comes from a broader idea of this hot, cold cognition, where you can go beyond executive functions and stuff. And so it makes it very hard for us to predict future actions from one state into another. So when we're feeling cold and calculating. We're like, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And then we get there and we're like, oh no, I'm not going to do any of that. That's so terrible.
Yeah. Turns out you're not equipped for it. You were equipped for it in the cold executive functioning state, and you were not equipped for it in the hot executive functioning state. I think we've all had that experience before.
And this is also something you see someone else doing something. You're like, why would they do that? That's a terrible decision. I would never do that.
Yeah.
And you're like, and then if you're in that situation, maybe you do make a different decision, or maybe it's a little bit more understanding. Like, oh, they made this decision because this was very stressful.
Yeah, 100%. We always, there's that bias between, you don't understand what I was feeling in the moment, I had to do this. And that kind of crosses over there as well. Should we get into what they did? Because they didn't just... Yeah, it was interesting. Do you want me to talk about the TRNS?
Yes, because I'm sure we just lost a whole bunch of people who were like...
It's okay. This is what we're doing. We're all going on this journey together. And honestly, there's some things that I learned just reading this paper. But one of the interesting things about brain studies is that they're always changing. They're always doing new things. But something that they've done for quite a while is basically they put things on your head, electrodes, nets, all of those kinds of things. And they use different magnetic stimulations or other stimulations to see what happens, basically. That's literally what it is. And they have in the past done really interesting things where if you pass a magnet over different parts of your brain, it can stop you from finding certain words. There's all this kind of stuff that we can do with the brain. And so what they wanted to do here was they wanted to use something that's a relatively recent brain stimulation technique called transcranial random noise stimulation, or TRNS. I'll just call that going forward. It's a non-invasive and electrical stimulation of the brain. So anything you're thinking it's just a thing on your head that has a weak oscillating current at random frequencies delivered using a pair of electrodes. And it's had a big increase in popularity partially because, and I think this is something that wasn't discussed in the paper, which I thought was so interesting, there are some people who are studying it, and there's papers from Nature, which is well regarded, and a couple of other papers, it as a standalone treatment for ADHD. So this idea that this could be a part of the suite of treatments that you have for ADHD is you actually get this brain stimulation that lasts longer than the actual thing. I didn't find really solid papers on it. I found some papers saying that it worked and some papers saying that it didn't work or it only worked in situations. So I'm not going to get into the effectiveness of that, but I thought that was a really interesting reason why they're doing this.
Yeah, because obviously this is a very preliminary, this is new stuff.
Very preliminary, please note.
Yeah, this is something where thinking about what are the practical implications with it, and it's, we can't take a lot of practical away from this in terms of this is how you treat your ADHD. But there are a lot of things to think about in terms of how our decision making is made through these kinds of things.
Exactly. So they put these pieces together and they basically said, okay, let's do a bunch of hot and cold executive functioning tests that they deemed to be hot and cold. They actually only did one hot one. I don't understand why, but whatever. And let's also do some of this TRNS stimulation on the brain or not in people who have ADHD, and let's see what happens, essentially. That was their hypothesis. That's what they wanted to figure out. Is this stimulation going to help with these hot and cold executive function?
Yeah. And I mean, I was interested with, there was a small sample size here because it was with 18 kids.
This one was interesting. So they were looking at particularly people who had ADHD. I always like to define what that means because it depends on who you talk to. So for them, they basically said they were all diagnosed based on the DSM 5th edition by a child and adolescent psychiatrist. 12 were taking medication, but they stopped 12 hours prior to the study. So that was how they defined who was in this group.
And then also important to notice that they did have a more of a control thing where they did have a sham version of the TRNS where it's just like, we're just going to, because if I understand correctly, it's like a cap you put on. And so that's pretty easy to be like,
Oh, it's
to
happening.
fake that you're doing stimulation. Yeah.
Yeah. It was funny they did this. They called it a sham. I'm a bit of a stickler. I would have preferred that they had done a control trial with people who didn't have ADHD, just because,
Mhm.
yes, they found that using tRNS stimulation improved the cognitive activation when doing these kind of hot and cold executive functioning tasks, which, if you want us to describe them, they're kind of random, but I was curious to know if that would have happened for everybody, like whether you had ADHD or not. The fact that they didn't have a control group in that context did feel like a missing piece of the puzzle in terms of being able to say confidently, okay, this paper points to the fact that people with ADHD specifically get benefits from this.
Yeah, rather than just, yeah, this could benefit everyone.
Yeah.
Because we do really want to be like, hey, is this something that, yes, it'd be great for everyone to improve their executive functions, but when we're talking about ADHD, being like, oh, is this something that would really help
Yeah.
us?
And is this something that is affecting my brain? You know, we're all benefiting from a cup of coffee. Like, what are we talking about here? So I thought that was interesting that they did the sham, but they didn't do that because I don't think it would have taken a lot to find just other people. But maybe I'm wrong in that. Yeah, do you want to explain any of the tests? They were pretty funny.
So we got the circle tracing, go, no go, one back with, that's an error in my notes, Wisconsin card sorting test. I had it as card snorting in my notes. And that'd be a vastly different test.
Yeah.
And then the balloon analog risk task, which was the hot one.
Yeah, that was kind of a bit of a gambling-esque task. You had things and you had to make decisions. You know, if the balloon burst, you lost money. And then all of the other tasks were very much like the go, no-go task is so common in these scenarios where they just go like, press this button when you're supposed to start, don't do it when you're supposed to stop. We with ADHD are pretty bad at that, generally speaking. And other tasks that just use your executive functioning.
What I was interested in too is I'm like, based on what we were saying earlier, all of these could be easily made into hot tasks if you added some.
A lot of these would be for me. I have dyscalculia, so math tasks are stressful. Like you were mentioning, oh, you solve a math problem and you do it in a relaxed way, and I was like, I don't know if I've ever done that.
Yeah, that's why I went with the very simple example, because I'm like, yeah, as soon as you get to real world examples of doing some of these things, you're like, oh, this makes it very hard to actually see if there's something that is a cold task when we put emotion into so much of everything that we do.
Exactly. Yeah, the definition of hot cold itself, I think, is interesting. I get it as a concept, but it's pretty hard to test. I think you'd have to put people under a little bit more stress than they really did here, and I thought it was interesting as well. Obviously, it's always hard to do these things. Research is such a complicated thing, but the fact that they had 4 cold tasks and 1 hot task, it just feels like they didn't quite get at this idea. This paper really could have been described as tRNS stimulation helps with executive functioning in children who have ADHD. The hot cold thing, you're not really looking at enough tests to make a solid argument there.
Yeah. And especially since when I was reading more about the hot cold tasks, I'm like, oh, you can measure those in different regions of the brain.
Yeah.
So that would be, I think, a great step forward, is being like, okay, not only are we going to measure if this is effective, we're going to measure if the tasks we're giving are in the correct region of the brain. If we give them this, if I gave you that math problem, would that be something that was in your hot or cold side?
Yeah, exactly, which is so fun. I love learning about that stuff. I think it brings, for a lot of people who are like, do I have ADHD? Is it a real thing? I got asked this on a podcast just this morning. And when you learn about the neuroscience behind it, it stops being that amorphous idea.
Because based on how we currently do diagnosis, it is very much this collection of symptoms that point to ADHD. You could have problems with It could also come from post-traumatic stress, could be lack of sleep.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's always what people are talking about. And, who knows? Maybe this is the future of ADHD strategy support, getting your brain stimulated. Or I think it's interesting that they're like talking about this as a possible way to get support when they're also struggling to get more than 18 people to do it, because it takes time and it's expensive and you have to have the equipment. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a widely used strategy.
With that in mind, do we have any key takeaways from this one?
I think just the idea that your brain is doing stuff and it can be measured. I always love coming back to that. And I think for a lot of people, this is an interesting gateway into the idea of hot, cold executive functioning, brain stimulation, all of these ideas.
Yeah, I think that's really the biggest takeaway for me here, is that people need to know about these different state things, because when you aren't thinking about your brain being in different states and how it functions better or worse depending on what state it's in or how well that particular state is functioning, makes it a lot harder to figure out, oh, what am I doing wrong in this situation?
Yeah.
Or why aren't things working?
Exactly. Like the idea of, why is this strategy that I'm using working on some days but not on others? Not understanding it could be the hot cold difference. Hello! So you were just listening to a research recap. I'm Skye Waterson of Unconventional Organization. If you like that, there's lots more information about ADHD and support for you at unconventionalorganization.com. You can go ahead and check that out. Lots of free resources, lots of strategies, and if you want to join our programs, you can do that as well. And we'll see you there, Unconventional Organization.